episode contains discussion of anti-Semitic violence and intergenerational trauma.
Welcome to the Carlat Psychiatry Podcast. I'm Dr. Josh Fader, the Editor-in-Chief of the Carlat Child Psychiatry Report.
And I'm Mara Goverman, a licensed clinical social worker in Southern California with a private practice. Today's episode is one that we've been sitting with for a long time. We're talking about how to survive psychologically in a world where hatred is persistent, not abstract, not metaphorical, but recurring and sometimes lethal. Josh, I want to start by asking you, what made this feel necessary to speak about this now?
This past week, we've had three major events, planetary, right? We had the Brown University school shooting. We had the Bondi Beach massacre during a Hanukkah celebration. And then we had the murders of the Reiner couple. This question keeps coming back in my work, in my community, even in my own nervous system, and maybe many of our listeners too. My own internal world formed in the presence of real danger from hateful people. And the hatred didn't end. It recedes, then it returns. And at this time of year, Hanukkah, the Christmas season, talking about joy or resilience without acknowledging that reality, frankly, feels dishonest.
And disingenuous. So you're already pushing against a lot of the language people usually rely on: resilience, optimism, even healing.
Well, yeah, that's because those frameworks often assume that there was some kind of before when everything was okay, and then the danger ended, right? But for many Jews and for people from many other groups, historically and presently, that just isn't true. Pause for a moment. Notice for yourself, right? When you hear the word healing, what kind of assumptions does that come with? It seems to imply safety. Does it imply safety? Does it imply closure? Or does it imply kind of forgetting what happened?
You said this isn't just trauma, it's developmental. Can you say more about that?
Development matters. For me and many people, this hate isn't something that I encountered as an adult with kind of a time when I had perspective and choice and maybe somebody to talk with about it, right? This exposure happens early when identity and a sense of safety or trust are still forming. Research in Northern Ireland by Paul Connolly and his colleagues showed that children as young as age of 3 years old can talk about their dislike of rival groups. Psychiatrist Dory Lobb writes about how trauma disrupts the sense that the world is a reliable place. That's not just fear, right? When people talk about difficulty experiencing joy, especially this time of year when people talk joy, this often reflects really an existential fracture.
Josh, is that what we're talking about? Erickson's trust versus mistrust stage?
Exactly. This experience of joy that we're expected to pursue depends on having a secure sense of safety. That was Erickson's, first psychosocial stage, trust versus mistrust. But when you grow up in a world where you are repeatedly attacked, that sense of safety is actually maladaptive. You need to function on a foundation, not of trust exactly, but of vigilance. So this trouble feeling joy or lack of joy that people talk about this time of year isn't pathological. It's kind of a prerequisite to survival.
It's actually biological. I'm remembering Abraham Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and safety is one of the first at the bottom of the pyramid. So I understand that a lot of the clients that are coming in during this time of year and experiencing these horrific world events are talking about guilt. So in any case, I want to slow this down a little bit because I think many listeners may recognize themselves here. There's often a quiet shame attached to not feeling light or joyful, especially when others seem to experience that joy.
Right. Shame comes before guilt. And that shame compounds the injury. Shame meaning there's something wrong with me, right? And that shame compounds the injury, right? It asks people to feel broken for adapting accurately to reality. Let me say that again. What you're saying to people when you say, oh, you should feel joy at the holiday, and maybe you feel guilty about the joy. I don't feel joy, but then you feel that's because there's something wrong with me. I feel the shame because there's something wrong with me. And yet, what you're doing by not experiencing what people are asking you to do is actually an accurate adaptation to reality that people aren't recognizing, that this societal push to experience joy demands that you not recognize that there is danger present, right? So if joy has felt elusive, like for listeners, if joy has felt elusive in your life, you got to ask yourself, did vigilance protect you from something? Is it protecting you even right now?
You said resilience can be the wrong framework altogether.
Right. So resilience is usually framed as bouncing back, right? That implies returning to a baseline sense of safety that may never have existed. That's the point here. Historian Yehuda Bauer emphasized that for Jews, anyway, there's this episodic and recurrent threat, right? And that's a best case, since anti-Semitism is always lurking under the veneer of civil acceptance.
Promoting resilience can feel like a demand to forget history.
Right. Or to pretend that past attacks just aren't relevant, right? We're not saying forget it, but we're saying, look, we've moved on from that. Forget about it. Either way, that robs a person of the psychological necessity of living without illusions. But this isn't to say that people exposed to chronic and intergenerational trauma are condemned to living without any kind of sense of feeling or emotion. And that's the point of the podcast. We need to arrive at a more authentic place, one that's different from the conventional idea of the pursuit of joy, and yet where life feels worth living.
Right. And being comfortable with the uncomfortable and still finding those moments of joy. Let's back up and talk about vigilance some more because it keeps people alive. It's survival, it's biological, but it does also extract a cost.
Right. Well, that's the central paradox. Vigilance preserves life. It also suppresses spontaneity and a sense of ease. Rachel Yehuda's work on intergenerational trauma, like about methylation of codons, things like that, where you can see in Holocaust survivors how these survival adaptations get passed down biologically, psychologically. So, a parent is under some chronic stress, and even their grandkids of Holocaust survivors have the same methylations that keep your stress response very kind of trigger happy. You're more likely to be alert and ready to fight, flee, whatever, that sort of thing. So these aren't really disorders. These are adaptations that create a kind of preparedness.
But preparedness and hypervigilance can take over everything.
Right. So people cope by overworking or making themselves indispensable or carrying moral responsibility for everyone around them. And those strategies can work for a little while, but only so long because they kind of consume you over time. Maybe you'll notice where vigilance lives in your body. And again, ask yourself, is it everywhere? Or are there places or times when that vigilance can rest?
So the goal isn't to eliminate vigilance, is it?
No, that would be unrealistic and frankly hazardous. So the goal is to contain this sense of vigilance, this keyed upness stuff that keeps you on edge and, making sure that you're safe, but to do that in a way that manages its persistent and pervasive prevalence in the present. So it doesn't constantly occupy every single internal space inside us.
You're making a really important distinction between the sense of joy and the appreciation of feeling alive.
Right. Joy is typically imagined as having this quality of lightness. But if you read survivor accounts, like Viktor Frankl's experiences in the death camps during the Holocaust, he describes what sustained people. It wasn't happiness, it was a sense of meaning and dignity and connection. And that can include grief and anger. And it doesn't require denial of your own lived experience or of intergenerational experience.
That certainly sounds like permission.
Yeah, it is. It's a different metric of health, right? So instead, you can say to yourself, why don't I feel more joy? But instead, maybe try asking yourself, where do I feel, when do I feel most alive?
You're talking about reframing the question, aren't you? And I also then want to talk about what doesn't help. Because people often mean well in trying to promote happiness, but inadvertently cause pressure and harm.
Absolutely. I'm often even promoting the idea that, three good things at the end of a day. It's always good to think about three good things that happen. That's kind of like a gratitude exercise that reminds you that there are good things in the world on a tough day. I think that's helpful. But when we force that ball, it's problematic. It's, again, sometimes asking people to deny that there are difficult things going on. Oh, you should be thankful is the problem here. Not it's helpful to find the things you're thankful for. That's a good thing. But that shoulding is not good for you. Another thing is premature forgiveness. Oh, we need to forgive. That's what's going to release us. We don't want people taking free rent in our minds, so we're going to forgive them. We're going to move on. Well, okay, I get that. And that can be a real release. But when you do it before or without really understanding what the meaning of that is, then you're sort of giving history a pass when it's not actually safe to do so. Another thing that happens is that some people universalize narratives that erase the specificity of your own experience. In my case, Jewish experience, it could be the same for Black experience or whatever group you're part of, right? It's sort of like when you're Black and you see a sign that says, all lives matter, you're saying, yeah, I get that, but what about Black lives? Because we have specific problems with, many more Black people being incarcerated. And for me, the violence rates against Jews are actually a lot higher than for any group in the country in the US right now. And, if we say, we don't want violence against anybody, well, yeah, but we have some specific problems in the Jewish community. That's a problem. It's all supposed to be about light and everything else. So this universalizing is actually problematic. So these approaches, this forced gratitude, premature forgiveness, universalizing narratives, they can recreate the original injury, being told your fear or anger or vigilance is incorrect or at the very least inconvenient.
So, what do you think really helps?
Continuity and contribution. That should be enough for people to remember from this podcast. Remember those two words. Sociologist Zygmunt Bauman wrote that hatred seeks erasure. Continuity defeats it. Also, we need to develop our understanding of kind of bounded safety, meaning knowing where hatred isn't, but without pretending that it's nowhere, right? So that might mean going to your community center with your pals and being able to celebrate in a way that is warm and engaging and it's safe for now, right? Contribution means finding ways to build a better world. Judith Herman reminds us that functional responses to trauma involve reclaiming our voice and engaging in meaningful social action.
I think you're saying that the drive to help others isn't merely a lesser choice than experiencing joy.
No, it's resistance. It's refusing to let suffering end in silence. And again, for listeners, it's important to think about what kind of continuity, cultural, relational, moral, help you anchor yourself when the world feels hostile, right? And the Reiner murders in particular, right? A lot of us grew up with some really great movies, Stand By Me, Princess Bride, stuff like that. And the sad murders of Rob and Michelle, I mean, just it puts yet another hole in your soul, doesn't it? To think that for whatever reason, however this unfolded, maybe partly related to our inability to help some people with mental health difficulties or other aspects that came into that. And on top of that, for instance, there's gun control already in Australia, but there it was, a whole bunch of guns in the possession of the terrorists who murdered the people at the Hanukkah celebration. Or we, at this time of our recording this, we haven't even found, law enforcement hasn't found the shooter in the Brown attack this past week as well. I mean, you think about that, and then you think about when the world feels pretty awful, how do we anchor ourselves? What do we do about that? Where do you find community? How can we help people to feel better? And we talk a lot, Mara and I, about responsive caregiving. When we are trying to help kids who are impacted by conflict, whether it's in Northern Ireland or the Middle East or other places, our research and our advocacy has been about helping caregivers, parents in particular, to respond to their kids in a way that helps them to be regulated and connected, meaningful flow of interaction. And that's what's happening when you're at your community center, whatever place and time it is, where you feel more alive. And it's also avoiding hateful media or doom scrolling on things like that. And really, that just kind of brings me to my hero, Fred Rogers. When we were writing this podcast, Mara said, you got to bring Fred into this. And she's right. It's about finding good people. One of the things Fred said, and I'm paraphrasing, when times are difficult, find the good people, because there are always good people. He's right, and we need to do that.
Well said. So as we close, I want to ask the hardest question. If hatred persists, what does survival actually look like?
Well, that's the heart of it. It looks like living meaningfully without surrendering historical truth. It looks like moments of warmth, shared laughter, intellectual delight, and experiencing the kind of love that knows the costs we pay to have these experiences. These aren't betrayals of vigilance. These are acts of defiance. Much more than that. They're authentic experiences of what it means to be alive.
And the intentional knowing that that's exactly what you do adds a more meaningful experience to every moment. Thank you, Dr. Fader, for taking on this really deeply challenging problem. And hopefully we've offered some really good ideas for our listeners.
Thank you, Mara, for helping me do that. Everything from Carlat Publishing is independently researched and produced. There's no funding from the pharmaceutical industry.
And if you found this episode valuable, which we sure hope you did, please share it with others who need to hear this message.
Thanks to all of you for tuning into this episode. Until next time, take care. And remember, when you look for good things, more good can happen.